Order.
O God, may your spirit and guidance be in us as we work for the benefit of our people, for peace and justice in our land, and for the constant recognition of the dignity and aspirations of those whom we serve. Amen.
Minister statements. Minister statements. Minister responsible for Environment and Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, climate change is one of the most critical issues we face today. I'm pleased to report on actions that N.W.T has taken to address the impact here in the N.W.T. As a territory, we are responsible for less than 0.2% of Canada's greenhouse gas emissions, but we are experiencing climate change warming at a rate that is 3 times the global average. We've already seen significant changes that are impacting our environment, our economy, our infrastructure, and our way of life. We are seeing changing ice conditions, coastal erosion, rising sea levels, and melting permafrost. Mr. Speaker, our government is committed to taking action to address these destructive impacts. Later today, we will table multiple annual reports highlighting work that has been done with our partners to mitigate and adapt to climate change across the N.W.T. I would like to highlight a few of these actions today. In January, we became the first jurisdiction in Canada to include consideration of a climate change factor in Cabinet and Financial Management Board decision-making. Assessing the potential impacts of government's decision on climate change, ensuring that meaningful and consistent climate change action is taken away departments and improving our accountability on climate action. We have also worked with our partners to establish a climate change council that includes members from Indigenous governments and community leaders. The council will include advisory groups such as youth, elders, community governments, industry, non-government organizations, co-management boards, and academia, who will inform priorities of the climate change action plan. In addition, the council will also include various advisory panels such as the Water Stewardship Panel, the Cumulative Impact Monitoring Program Panel, and the Sustainable Livelihood Panel that will provide advice and recommendation. The council and advisory groups are important forum to bring together community perspectives and expert guidance as we face a challenging climate. Mr. Speaker, climate action takes investment in people and programs. Over the last year, our government has made significant investments when it comes to addressing climate change. We have invested over $56 million, have created 15 new positions across government to work on climate change actions. In 2021, the Department of Infrastructure invested over $38 million as part of the 2030 energy strategy and for energy and greenhouse gas reduction projects and programs, which resulted in 3.6 kilotons of greenhouse gas emissions reductions. This $38 million included significant investment in energy efficiency and renewable energy projects, such as providing over $5.3 million to the Arctic Energy Alliance, resulting in nearly $2 million in incentives being given out. These incentives help residents, businesses, and communities to be more energy efficient. Our government has also invested roughly $3.8 million in energy retrofits to government assets, which has contributed to our own emission reduction over the last year. Mr. Speaker, the Department of Finance continues its efforts on carbon pricing over the last year. The price per ton of greenhouse gas emissions raised to $30 and will provide rebates for residents to reduce the burden caused by high costs associated with residential heating. Mr. Speaker, I'd also like to highlight that earlier this month, the N.W.T participated in the 26th Council of Parties in Glasgow, Scotland, as part of the Canadian delegation. It is unfortunate due to the pandemic, Indigenous participation was not fully represented this year as previous conferences. I'm hopeful that Indigenous participation will return to pre-COVID levels at future conferences, and commitment to work with Indigenous governments and Indigenous organizations through the Climate Change Council to support Indigenous participation in the future. COP26 was an opportunity for the N.W.T to engage directly with the Government of Canada to advocate the N.W.T climate change interests and to highlight the unique challenges and opportunities that exist in N.W.T. We share ideas, learned from others, and brought back knowledge to inform our efforts on climate change mitigation and adaptation. Our government will continue to lead in the fight against climate change. We will keep working closely with Indigenous governments and Indigenous organizations, the federal government, community leaders, academia, industry, and non-government organizations who are our allies in taking actions on climate change. The N.W.T has accomplished a lot over the past year in addressing climate change, but there's still work to be done. We must all work together to find solutions to address climate change in the Northwest Territories and continue this important work. I know that we all rise to this challenge. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Minister statements. Minister statements. Minister responsible for infrastructure.
Mr. Speaker, strengthening our leadership and authority on climate change and enhancing efforts to stabilize the cost of power is a priority of the Government of the Northwest Territories. So is increasing the use of alternative and renewable energy. Today, as part of our government's integrated approach to climate change reporting, we will release 4 reports, including the 2020-21 Energy Initiatives Report. This report outlines almost $38 million in energy-related investments the N.W.T made during the past fiscal year. These investments not only reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and help us take real action against climate change, they also provide our communities with reliable energy and stabilize costs for residents. This supports the goal of the Northwest Territories' 2030 Energy Strategy and 2030 Climate Change Strategic Framework. Mr. Speaker, projects that are positively impacting residents and communities include those from Greenhouse Gas Grant Program. One of the 3 projects approved this year by the N.W.T was $1.1 million for the installation of 2 wood pellets boilers in 2 Yellowknife schools in Mildred Hall and Range Lake North. Once these boilers were installed and operating, they are expected to reduce 578 tons of greenhouse gas emissions each year. This last year, the N.W.T provided $5.3 million to the Arctic Energy Alliance, resulting in nearly $2 million in incentives being given out. These funds support the energy efficiency, conservation, alternative energy programs, and services. Residents, businesses, communities all benefit. This year, the organization provided 1,000 more rebates than in the 2019-2020, despite dealing with the challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic. We continue to advance key projects that will help us reduce greenhouse gas emissions from electricity generation in diesel communities by 25%, one of the strategic objectives of the 2030 Energy Strategy. This summer, the N.W.T and the federal government announced $60 million in funding to build a Fort Providence-Kakiza transmission line. This project will virtually eliminate diesel fuel consumption for power generation in these communities and reduce the greenhouse gas emissions by 3,000 tons per year. Mr. Speaker, the Inuvik Wind Project is another important initiative under the 2030 Energy Strategy. This 3.5 megawatt wind turbine will reduce diesel consumption in our largest off-grid community by up to 30%. The permitting phase for the project has been completed and it moved into final design. Construction is tentatively scheduled to start in the winter of 2022. When it comes to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, the N.W.T is leading by example through the Capital Asset Retrofit Fund. This program delivers energy-efficient projects for N.W.T facilities to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Projects completed in the last fiscal year decreased government emissions by 2 kilotons. The N.W.T continues to advance the Tolston hydroelectricity expansion project. Technical work on transmission routing options is also ongoing. We expect a preliminary business case for the project later this fiscal year. Mr. Speaker, while we have accomplished a great deal during the first three years of implementing the 2030 energy strategy, we must keep moving forward. It is time to take stock of the lessons we have learned in implementing this strategy. We must combine these learnings with new research and analyze to inform a renewed strategy and accompanying the Energy Action Plan. As the N.W.T conducts this review and carries on with implementation, we will continue to engage directly with communities, Indigenous governments, and organizations to ensure their participation, partnership, and empowerment when proposing and implementing energy solutions. The N.W.T cannot meet its energy and climate change objectives by acting alone. We need all Northerners to play a role. By continuing to work together, we can make it happen. Kuya naini, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Minister statements, Minister statements, Member statements, Member statements, Member for Thabacha.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as caucus chair, I must address a very important issue, which is affecting everybody in this building, the Legislative Assembly, as well as all people across the N.W.T. The issue I'm referring to is the need to maintain proper confidentiality of certain sensitive matters that are before the Assembly, and the need for more unity, cohesion, trust, and professionalism as MLAs. This Assembly has been plagued by constant and ongoing leaks of various confidential and sensitive information. These leaks have had damaging effects on proper function of our government. They also affected people's lives, careers, and families. I've always been a proponent of accountable and transparent governance. However, in my work, it's also extremely important to balance that with confidentiality of sensitive information. Both as an MLA, but especially as caucus chair, I expect a certain level of respect for the office we hold and for the common good of the people of the N.W.T. Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, if this Assembly continues to engage in sideshow activities on concluded matters, where neutral decisions have already been made by independent third parties, then the work of the Assembly will suffer. We've dealt with all these sideshows already in the Assembly's workplace review and in the inquiry and work of the sole adjudicator. It is distracting from and obstructing the work of the Legislative Assembly. Therefore, for the sake of the people of the N.W.T, the sideshow has got to stop. In addition, I think some of the content quoted within the December 6, 2021 News North front page is unprofessional, out of context, and must stop. I, for one, am not controlled by no one. And I'm tired of our Assembly being portrayed as dysfunctional by the media and by the people of the N.W.T. For the dignity of this House, we must restore order to this Assembly and end this sideshow behavior. A sideshow is not what we signed up for, but that is what the business of the Assembly risks coming to. Mr. Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to conclude my statement.
Thank you, Member for Thabacha. The member seeking unanimous consent to conclude her statement. Are there any nays? If there are no nays, you may conclude your statement.
Our Assembly has lost its focus and has devoted considerable public funds and government resources to responding to and dealing with these various sideshow activities. It is time-consuming and inefficient for staff to continue to respond to these activities. What does it accomplish? Nothing. Everything is at stake, from the staff morale of the Assembly to the very confidence of the people of the N.W.T. We were put here to make the N.W.T. a better place. But are we really accomplishing that right now? Lastly, Mr. Speaker, December for many people is supposed to be a joyful time during the special holiday season marked on our calendars. We shouldn't need to deal with this type of stuff. For those who want to continue these sideshow activities, just stop. For those who won't stop, our leadership must take action. We must turn the page on these matters and move on. This Assembly has plenty of work to address. We can't be putting ourselves first before the people of the N.W.T. That is not good leadership. It is not what we were elected here to do. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Thabacha. Member statements. Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. In June 2021, I tabled redacted summaries of the secret meetings of the N.W.T. Chamber of Mines COVID Recovery Working Group. I tabled another set of summaries earlier this sitting as well, and they contained about 80 additional disclosures from the department as a result of a new review conducted under our more permissive amendments to the Access to Information and Protection of Privacy Act. As I said before, what was supposed to be a working group focused on economic recovery from the impacts of the COVID pandemic has transitioned into a high-level lobbying campaign. This is not about whether mining is good or criticism of the Chamber of Mines. This is about the appropriateness of these meetings held behind closed doors. In June, I outlined several options for the Minister to bring some transparency and accountability to these secret meetings, which does not appear to have been adopted in any way. So I'll repeat them again here. Now that this information about these meetings has been made public, the Minister has several options as I see it. The Minister could stop these meetings now that the pandemic is almost over, confine these meetings to their original and stated purpose of economic recovery rather than the current lobbying campaign that appears to have no limits, allow other interested parties to observe and/or participate, make complete summaries of these meetings public, allow other economic sectors and non-governmental organizations the same opportunity for consultation and lobbying, and/or bring in lobbyist legislation so there is proper disclosure guidance for lobbying. I'll have questions later today for the Minister of Industry, Tourism and Investment on the N.W.T. Chamber of Mines COVID-19 Recovery Working Group. Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Frame Lake. Member statements. Member for Dechu.
Merci, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, given the upcoming festive season, I wanted to share a message regarding abstinence from alcohol and drugs. I wanted to relay a message about options should you continue and options to do other activities rather than turn to alcohol and drugs for enjoyment. Mr. Speaker, when one chooses to party it up, whether they are single or in a relationship, and especially if they have children, there are significant effects to that decision. What we see from our communities and monthly RCMP crime reports is the escalating domestic violence and sexual assaults that plague our small communities. Since COVID hit, there has been a significant increase in the use of alcohol and drugs, especially with all the free money floating around. Many families are running into problems with living expenses as they choose to buy significant amounts of alcohol and drugs. Everything else is secondary to the fun they can have. The families of these people suffer because of their decisions, and they bear the brunt of the stress of waiting to see if they will come home safely. And for many, it's the children that are affected in this way. We see far too often how happy the children are when their parents are home and taking care of them. This is what should be thought of before making decisions to purchase alcohol and drugs. What they also don't realize is the amount of stress that is placed on our ever-decreasing healthcare and staffing levels. Most get serious injuries from falls or beatings, and most times can't get the immediate attention they require due to staffing levels. Mr. Speaker, there are more positives than negatives when one abstains from alcohol and drugs. There is the all-important family relationship with immediate family and beyond, including the whole community. Healthy, clear minds see improved mental health for all, increases willpower and self-esteem. Mr. Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to conclude my statement. Masi.
Thank you, Member for Detroit. The member seeking unanimous consent to conclude a statement. Are there any nays? There are no nays. You may conclude your statement.
Mr. Speaker and Masi colleagues, this will also improve education outcomes, as our elders envisioned for us and have stated. We want good education for our children and future generations to become doctors, lawyers, and teachers, and so forth. Abstinence from alcohol and drugs creates a positive community atmosphere, as this will hopefully improve volunteerism, and that helps to improve life in the communities. I encourage all residents of the Northwest Territories to start doing and making things happen for your family, your friends, your community, and most of all, for yourself. There are always supports within your community to begin this journey. Please take advantage of all services available to improve your lives. Masi.
Thank you, Member for Detroit. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as a regular member, I'm active on our Social Development Committee, which has identified children and family services as an area of focus. From this work, I've been learning so much about the issues facing families and youth in the N.W.T. One area that I'm becoming more familiar with is the foster care system, and I want to thank everyone who has taken the time to speak with me about this topic, as it's a sensitive one. Mr. Speaker, when I look at our social problems, I can see the gap that youth and young adults are falling into. Aging out or kicked out of foster care, they often find themselves with little to no options, with too many going on to become chronic dependents of social welfare as adults. One way we can remove adults from our system is to prevent them from becoming dependent on it in the first place. And in the Northwest Territories, only one organization is supporting youth to get them out of the system, and that is Homebase Yellowknife. Homebase is a youth support organization that offers 4 programs for youth to help them become self-sufficient and deal with trauma from their childhoods. Homebase has 10 full-time dorm spaces in their main building on 52nd Street, also operating a shelter there from 8 to 8 daily. The shelter provides a safe space for youth to sleep, have a meal, and wash their clothes. Homebase operates a second youth center next to Overlander Sports, open from 12 to 8 every day, providing a second place for youth to shower, do laundry, eat, and work on resumes and life planning. Homebase also has a housing program that assists 20 to 24-year-olds with housing through commercial leases or at their newly acquired Park Place apartment building near City Hall. Youth can attend any of Homebase's programs to receive support, advice, and guidance on careers and life management skills. The goal of Homebase is to stabilize youth in order to reintegrate them into society and get them back to school. Although Homebase wants to increase youth shelter supports to 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, their current financial projection means a cut to shelter hours is coming, rather than an expansion. In order to even maintain the current level of programming, Homebase needs additional emergency homelessness assistance funding to do so. While Homebase receives programming money, they do not have core funding available for wages or to buy essential supplies. With core funding for staff and supplies, Homebase could offer 24-hour supports to youth in an effort to divert this vulnerable population from a lifetime of dependence on social programming. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Great Slave. Member statements. Member statements. Member for N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my constituents travel medical appointments either to Inuvik or they're traveling in from Inuvik to Yellowknife if they can't be serviced. And if we can't do the servicing for medical here, we're sending them to Edmonton. My constituents fly all the way from their home communities who probably takes 5 days in return to going into the community. They wait for their appointment, especially, you know, some of our cancer patients that we've lost so many people this year due to cancer. We do need a health advocate, Mr. Speaker, in Inuvik Regional Hospital to assist our communities to making sure that the people are getting to their appointments. Information is shared on the patient and so likely at what's happening. This means that the travel dates in the right place for the right times for their appointments to be on time, because there's a little bit, I got a couple of concerns from my mayor from YELLOWKNIFE that patients are traveling and they're not having an escort, they're getting to their appointment, there's no appointments. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, sometimes things get missed, appointments, but they don't book the flights, book the travel. This means sometimes residents need treatment and they don't get it at the right time. And this has to stop, Mr. Speaker. We need the patients. We need a patient's advocate again. We need somebody to help the patient in the communities that are at their nursing stations to help them, because they're overworked already. Our nursing staff, our health staff, they're overworked and they need their patient advocate out of Inuvik to help assist them to do their job. We, you know, sometimes they get calls 1 in the morning or a text message, and they're saying, oh, I traveled at 9 o'clock, I never got no travel yet. I'm not going to wake up the health minister, Mr. Speaker, at 2 o'clock in the morning saying I need travel done for somebody. I'll send her a text message, and Julie's been good about it, or the minister's been good about it, to get back to me first thing in the morning, and we try to get it sorted out and try to do good for the patient. But, Mr. Speaker, we do need a health advocate in Inuvik. I will have questions for the minister on where that health advocate is for the community, to assist communities out of the Inuvik Regional Hospital. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for the N.W.T. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Mumfui.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, my member statement is for Minister of Education on community-based program. Okay. Mr. Speaker, we cannot wait for Polytechnic University. Bring the program to the communities rather than having students leave their communities, families, culture, and language. They will get the same education as students attending post-secondary education in the South. The N.W.T is too dependent on workers from the South. These workers often don't stay in our small communities very long. We have many young people in our communities with grade 12 education, either unemployed or underemployed, with others having to go on income support. Mr. Speaker, the Community Labor Force survey shows that the Klitschko region has the highest rate of unemployment in the N.W.T at 28%, the lowest participation rate in the workforce at 60%, and lowest employment rate at 43.6%. Mr. Speaker, if the Aurora College campuses based in Klitschko communities were fully utilized to deliver community-based program, we would have local people trained to fill the need for local jobs in communities. The challenge to promote post-secondary education in the Klitschko region is that not everyone wants to leave their communities or be away for a long period of time without the support of the families and culture. Further, with housing shortage in the N.W.T, young families do not want to leave their home, as there is no guarantee they will be able to access housing upon their return. Mr. Speaker, times have changed, technologies are improving, Can I have a unanimous consent to conclude my statement, please?
Thank you, member for Mumfway. The member seeking unanimous consent to conclude her statement. Are there any nays? There are no nays. You may conclude your statement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, times have changed. Technologies are improving. It should be possible to deliver Aurora College programs like education, social work, nursing remotely in the communities. And or if the Aurora College does not have the capacity, perhaps another college or university can come and deliver the program. Who delivers the program is not as important as the fact that they must be delivered and based in small communities. Facilitating the delivery of college program in Klitschko region is a good opportunity to train young people to get the jobs they want and to find work to better their communities. The government can also save money on relocation costs for Southern employees and reduce dependence on outside workforce. We need to invest more money in the younger generations. Government leaders at every level say that the youth are the future, but Mr. Speaker, we seem to be failing to make the necessary investments in their future. The people that live in the N.W.T are not going anywhere. They are going to stay in their communities and work for the benefit for all Northerners. If the government can make the necessary investment in young people, the government can take a person dependent on the government for income support and social housing and turn them into a taxpayer. These savings and the savings from relocation costs should help to pay for these programs. Our community people with the right training will do a better job as they know their communities, the people, the culture, and language. The graduate will be part of northern economies. Must Mr. Speaker, I will have a question for the Minister of Education. Thank you.
Thank you, member for Mumfway. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Hay River South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I am very pleased that a new long-term day shelter has been made available to those in Yellowknife that have no other means of staying warm, staying fed, and staying safe during these cold winter days. Mr. Speaker, it used to shock me how fast projects in Yellowknife, like the day shelter or others, can happen, and how quickly funds can be found. Not anymore. I soon realized that when you are a city with a population of some 20,000 plus, when you have the Premier, the Minister of Health, and the Minister of Finance all being from Yellowknife, it will increase the pace at how fast funds can be secured and how quick an idea can be put into action. Mr. Speaker, I want to now quote a portion of the statement made yesterday in a press release by the Minister of Health, which reads, and I quote, "As part of our commitment to reconciliation and to ensure that everyone can access safe shelter facilities," end of quote. Mr. Speaker, I was pleased to hear the Minister refer to reconciliation and by further stating that everyone should have access to safe shelters. However, our regional centres and smaller communities are also struggling with the same issues, but do not have the population of Yellowknife, nor do we have the Premier, nor the Minister of Health, nor the Minister of Finance living in our communities to support something similar. Our communities desperately need something in place for longer term. Addressing the need for a day and night shelter every fall is not sufficient. It is not fair to NGOs that provide that service, it is not fair to the communities, and most importantly, it is not fair to those who require the service. Mr. Speaker, I believe this government is on the right path with respect to supporting those finding themselves living on the street by providing long-term shelter options. For those in regional and smaller communities, they must have equal and equitable access to supports that those in Yellowknife take for granted. We need to identify local infrastructure that is being underutilized or sitting empty and repurpose it for long-term shelters and programming in our communities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Haver South. Member statements, member statements, member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A diverse and committed arts community exists in the Northwest Territories, with literally dozens of groups in the areas of dance, theatre, music, film, visual arts, crafts, and many more. Organizations may be small, but they are big on hard work, enthusiasm, commitment, and inclusive programs that reach across our communities. Artists understand and acknowledge how the arts function to support our social strengths, our human health and well-being. Hill Research Strategies and Ottawa Reports reveals the link between the arts and student engagement in education, positive economic impact, and cultural tourism, improved quality of life, importance in Aboriginal health and well-being, and the list goes on. Beyond these, at a time when social changes and challenges are many, the arts provide a valid way to engage community learning, exploration, idea exchange, and critical dialogue that ground our culture and identity. These same artists are seeing gaps, key gaps, that are limiting the role the arts can play in diversifying and strengthening our territorial economy. One is the lack of a properly funded arts hub, typically found in every other capital in Canada. Mr. Speaker, we currently have a surge in vacant space in downtown Yellowknife, the Belonka building, and with other government offices being vacated as they move to new buildings. We have an opportunity now to take action. Many of this space is in Welladay, an ideal location for an institution. Wait a minute, Mr. Speaker, I apologize. I just read a statement from my predecessor, Bob Bromley, from over a decade ago, Mr. Speaker, because nothing has changed in this focus, Mr. Speaker. And now we have released an art strategy, and still nothing has changed, Mr. Speaker. I do not believe this art strategy is taking this issue seriously. I do not believe we are capturing the federal money that is out there. There are numerous funding pots across numerous organizations in the federal government, and if we had a proper art strategy, maybe we could actually make some progress on this issue. I'll have questions for the Minister of EC&E. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Yellowknife North. Member statements, member statements, member for N.W.T. Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, N.W.T. spending is a key economic driver for the N.W.T. We know through the pandemic how much we rely on N.W.T. spending. And Mr. Speaker, the impact of N.W.T. spending extends to the procurement decision made not just by this government, but for the Crown corporations supported by our public funds. Mr. Speaker, I want to recognize that the N.W.T. has undertaken a review of procurement and has made a commitment towards an Indigenous procurement policy, which is very positive. Local N.W.T.-based businesses, N.W.T. Indigenous businesses that are based in our communities hire local employees and contribute wealth back to the community. And we hear often of them falling through the gaps of the N.W.T. spending. I am concerned, Mr. Speaker, if the procurement review will address the gaps that we see with the N.W.T. businesses today as they compete on bids. Mr. Speaker, the procurement review needs to recognize full impact of N.W.T. spending and include a review of how its arm's-length Crown corporations who spend hundreds of millions of dollars every year and are procuring N.W.T. goods and services. Will the N.W.T. hold Crown corporations accountable to the value of the N.W.T.-based spending? Mr. Speaker, the N.W.T. also needs to improve the directory of the N.W.T.-based businesses to ensure that it's comprehensive and reflects local business registries. An updated and current N.W.T. business registration will improve procurement decisions for N.W.T. and its Crown corporations. Mr. Speaker, public money should be leveraged to grow our local economy through the N.W.T.-owned businesses. N.W.T.-owned businesses need to be prioritized for all N.W.T. spending, including the extension of N.W.T. spending through its Crown corporations. N.W.T. needs to ensure that local Indigenous business are considered first and that companies who do business within the N.W.T. or N.W.T. Crown corporations are required to demonstrate local ownership and local employment. Mr. Speaker, the strategy behind the N.W.T. spending right now is essential to build back our economy and ensuring our communities have an economic chance. I will have questions for the Minister of Finance later today. Thank you.
Thank you, member for N.W.T. Lakes. Member statements, member statements, member for Kamloops.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as a child, I have vivid memories as my mother's sidekick as N.W.T artists discussed the needs of the N.W.T arts community. Many of the faces that advocated then are the same in today's fabric of arts activists, but they're tired of asking for the same things: core funding, independence, and infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, the G&W.T released the next 10-year art strategy. Despite several suggestions to improve the strategy from standing committees on both economic development and environment and social development, not one suggestion was considered or incorporated into the final draft. I have shared my gratitude for a strategy focused on art many times, but I am disappointed that this strategy does not clearly capitalize on the opportunity to grow N.W.T arts now. In 2020, the Government of Canada announced $181.5 million in additional funding for Heritage Canada and the Canada Council for the Arts. These dollars cannot fund the G&W.T and are exclusive to independent arts organizations. The ministers of ITI and ECE recognize this, yet we still have no path to transition to an independent N.W.T Arts Council and continue to miss out on funding, economic development, and growth for Northern artists. The board of the N.W.T Arts Council has been recently filled, yet the G&W.T states in the art strategy that the G&W.T will, quote, support the arts community to explore the feasibility or interest in creating an arm's-length entity that would support and strengthen the N.W.T creative sector, end quote. But independent arts councils aren't a new idea. Arts councils of most jurisdictions administer the majority of government art funds, which in turn provide core funding for other regional arts organizations, key festivals, and events. So why is the G&W.T dragging its feet and putting this work onto artists in volunteer roles to explore the feasibility of such an organization? Mr. Speaker, in addition to legislation, an arts council needs core funding. The art strategy does not identify a commitment of core funding. Most public funding initiatives are project or program specific and do not keep the lights on or staff working. If we want a robust art strategy supported by experienced staff, the Council needs the capacity to go after significant pots of private and public funding. A solution to truly propel the N.W.T arts is before the G&W.T. Significant federal funding is available. COVID has given a boost to the arts on the global stage, and the time for change is now, so that hopefully the member for Yellowknife North won't be reading my statement 3 terms from now. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Kamloops. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Nahende.
Mr. Speaker, Mary Bernadine McKinnon, formerly known as Petrie, known to us as Bernie, peacefully passed away in the arms of her partner, Terry Arnold, on August 23rd in Happy Valley, Labrador, Newfoundland, at the age of 62 from a historical battle with cancer. Born on the west side of PEI, she battled hard all her life. She was a cook in many seafood restaurants. She was a co-captain on a lobster boat and a general manager of Subways. She and her husband ended up coming north to work for the Northwest company known as the Northern Star. They moved from Hay River to Fort Smith and on to Fort Simpson. Bernie excelled in every position she was placed in. I got to meet her when she was the food service manager in Fort Simpson. Because of her hard work, she received the Food Service Manager of the Year. Bernie made friends with people very quickly as she was very thoughtful, caring, and a sincere person. It was Bernie's fondness that made her a special person to her co-workers and customers alike, making lifelong friends from all the stores she worked in. A perfect example is when she convinced a young man who with some substance abuse problems to go out for help at a rehab place. He turned his life around, became a counselor, married a beautiful woman. Today, previously, he and Bernie still played Scramble online till her passing. The amazing thing was that he did not get a chance to beat her. The family would like to thank the Northern Star for helping them move closer to Bernie's home province as she was recovering from her first battle with cancer. Bernie also spoke about her 5 children and grandchildren. They, along with Terry, were her life. Bernie will be sadly missed by her partner of 17 years, her children and grandchildren. God bless her, and may she have peace with the Lord. As well, both her parents, who are in heaven. Terry and the family would like to thank all the medical staff that helped Bernie during the battle, especially the medical staff in Fort Simpson and the Stanton Hospital and the hospital in Edmonton. They made sure she and her honey were treated well. She will sadly be missed. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Nahende. Our thoughts and prayers are with the family and community at this time. Member statements. Member statements. Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Reports of committees on the review of bills. Reports of committees on the review of bills. Reports of standing and special committees. Reports of standing and special committees. Returns to oral questions. Returns to oral questions. Acknowledgements. Acknowledgements. Colleagues, before we begin with oral questions, I'll just ask everyone to please respect one another. I know sometimes we have a lot of heated discussions on whether you're asking questions or answering, and sometimes we don't always like the answers that are given. I've been there, and sometimes we get heated, but just please respect one another. Thank you. Oral questions. Oral questions. Member for N.W.T.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, today I brought up the healthcare advocate for the Beaufort Delta in the N.W.T Regional Hospital. Mr. Speaker, I'm asking the Minister of Health, is there any, was it put into place, the healthcare advocate at the N.W.T Regional Hospital? Thank you.
Thank you, Member for N.W.T. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the regular members negotiated in addition to this year's operating budget of 4 Indigenous patient advocates that would be located in Inuvik, Hay River, Fort Smith, and Yellowknife. Their specific mandate is to work to improve cultural safety and patient experience by supporting Indigenous patients in particular in resolving their concerns, complaints, and questions, and bridging cultural and language barriers. The job descriptions for these Indigenous patient advocates are now in development, and we expect to have them in place next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Really thank the Minister for that response. It's a good news story, and I think that, so is the Minister saying January of next year? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for N.W.T. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
I think I might feel the flames at my feet, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, what the information I have is that it will be early next year. So let's say by the time we come back. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No questions. Just really happy that we're giving a patient's advocate so people have a place to phone and get assistance and get quicker response times. And thank the Minister for that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral questions. Oral questions. Member for Frame Lake.
Monsieur le Président, my questions are for the Minister of Industry, Tourism and Investment. A couple of weeks ago, I tabled redacted meeting summaries from the N.W.T Chamber of Mines COVID-19 Working Group meetings. From the April 28th meeting, ITI states, quote, allowing money from philanthropic organizations from the South is something we will be watching so it doesn't influence land use planning with more protected areas, end of quote. Can the Minister tell us which philanthropic organizations are being watched and what kind of monitoring or surveillance is being conducted? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Frame Lake. Minister responsible for Industry, Tourism and Investment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there is no surveillance being conducted. Mr. Speaker, I understand that these meeting minutes continue to be a source of great consternation. They are minutes. They are taken by a note taker. They are not transcripts, and they certainly are not something to which I would say speak on my behalf about what the department is or is not doing or the priorities of the department. So just to put that context on the quotes that are coming is, again, they're notes taken by someone at a meeting. That said, Mr. Speaker, philanthropic organizations, this quote, this has long been a matter raised by certain members of the industry that we want to ensure that when decisions are being made about land use in the Northwest Territories, that those decisions are made by members of the regions in which the matters arise, so that they're decisions made by northern residents by northern communities, by northern governments, and that's really the role of the GNWT here, is not to go spying on anybody, but simply to facilitate land use planning by and for the benefit of Northerners. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I want to thank the Minister for that. In October 2021, Alberta released the report from the $3.5 million Allen inquiry into foreign-funded anti-energy campaigns that found no evidence of wrongdoing by environmental groups. Can the Minister tell us whether this government is going to hold a similar public inquiry in terms of watching philanthropic organizations, or does this government actually recognize the value that these organizations can bring to the N.W.T? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Frame Lake. Minister responsible for ITI.
Mr. Speaker, we very fortunately in this government have the L&R departments all working well together. That is lands, natural resources, and environment all working together. In this particular instance, ENR happens to be the lead in terms of trying to work through a process for governance where we might, if there were to be opportunities to work with large organizations to bring funding alternatives on conservation initiatives, then we want to ensure, again, as a collective and as the GNWT and as Northerners, that we'd be doing that within a structure that is for the benefit of Northerners. So we don't share the concern that I believe was the impetus behind that study and behind that inquiry, that there was some sort of nefarious thing happening. We are quite trusting and quite happy to work with anyone who wants to come and be mindful of the benefits of Northern residents and Northern communities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I want to thank the Minister for those words. As I understand it, the Chamber of Mines has filed for a judicial review of a decision by the Mackenzie Valley Land and Water Board not to issue unlimited extensions to land use permits. And Mr. Speaker, I don't want to speak to the case in any way, but the meeting summary showed that the Chamber met with the ministers, ministers of this government about their application before it was filed. So can the Minister tell us what happened in those meetings? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Frame Lake. Minister responsible for ITI.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I wasn't at the meetings, but I was able to make inquiries, and I appreciate a bit of a heads up that these topics might be coming. The importance or the desire of industry to ensure that they have access to leases that are effective has long been a matter of their advocacy. That said, this is an area where, although I understand CERNAC, on behalf of the federal government, might have actually taken the position that leases should be extended, the GNWT has not taken a position. We have remained neutral, and we continue to remain neutral, and whatever process might be happening before the courts with other parties, as the members already said, is not ours to speak to here. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister, final supplementary. Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I want to thank the Minister for clarifying that. I've suggested a couple of times now there are a number of options to bring greater transparency and accountability to these secret meetings. Can the Minister tell us whether these meetings are consistent with our open government policy and describe how she is going to bring greater transparency and accountability to these secret meetings? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Frame Lake. Minister responsible for ITI.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, given the multiple times we've now spoken about these meetings, I'm not sure I agree with the characterization of them as being particularly secret in any fashion. And indeed, even after the last round of exchanges that the member and I had on this, the Chamber of Mines themselves put a number of the meeting minutes onto their own website to demonstrate that they too are more than happy to make known the fact that they are working to advance the interests of the industry with the GNWT. As for the ongoing work there, Mr. Speaker, I certainly took note of the concerns that were raised in the last time that this matter came before the House. The Deputy Minister and I are looking to have a new set of terms of reference issued. When I have them, I will certainly make them available to the members so that we are able to, in fact, be clear and focused on the purpose here. And the clear focus is that this is an anchor area, an anchor section of the economy. It's one that we want to see supported, and we want to work with those with their knowledge of that sector to see where we have mutual areas of interest. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Oral questions. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my questions are for the Housing Minister, who is also the Minister responsible for youth. My first question is, will the minister commit to touring home base and learning about the work and programs that they're providing firsthand? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Great Slave. Minister responsible for Northwest Territories Housing Corporation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member for the question. That I have met with Home Base recently and through Zoom, and I have been able to receive a comprehensive understanding of the supports that they provide to the youth. But looking forward into the new year, I will commit to touring the facility with the member. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I thank the minister for that commitment to come and take a look at their operations. I think it's always good when you can see things firsthand. Let's keep it on vein of saying yes. Can the minister commit to providing Home Base with emergency funding to expand support hours to 24/7 and to keep their shelters open? The reason that this is so crucial right now is the temperatures are dropping, and they do provide a very important service for youth. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Great Slave. Minister responsible for housing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To date, the Housing Corporation has supported Home Base with capital funding under our Shelter Enhancement Fund to do minor retrofits to the building. Their operational funding has been provided by Health and Social Services. I understand the emergency shelter funding within the Northwest Territories has been fully subscribed and allocated to all 7 current operating shelters across the Northwest Territories. I can assure the member and the House that the Housing Corporation is in further discussion with Home Base after our recent meeting with them to see how the Housing Corporation can work with them. And the Housing Corporation will invite other social program departments to participate in these discussions. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the minister's answers sort of speak to my next question as well. Can the minister commit to assisting or working with her colleagues to look for core funding for the home-based programs so that we can keep youth from not experiencing homelessness, as well as ease the burden on social services? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Great Slave. Minister responsible for housing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I understand that there is a need and importance of the service they provide. We are currently in conversations with other social development departments after our mutual role and responsibilities when it comes to funding and supporting the various shelters and accommodation supports across Northwest Territories. The support provided to youth is one of the specific target groups. We are also in conversation with Canada and across and to access programs like the federal Reaching Home initiative to support programs and facilities within the Northwest Territories. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm glad to hear the minister speak about working with other departments. I think that the way that youth are being dealt with definitely crosses multiple departments, so we do need to keep breaking down those silos. My last question is, will the minister commit to touring other buildings in my district, such as Norseman Manor and Simpson House, to see where we are placing the vulnerable youth and committing to developing an action plan to end youth homelessness? Thank you.
Thank you, member for Great Slave. Minister responsible for housing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The department does have a working group with the various lessees that we hold in Yellowknife, and also I will be making sure and commit that we reflect the youth homelessness needs in our homelessness strategy that will be tabled in early 2022. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Oral questions. Member for Kamloops.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my questions today are for the Minister for Education, Culture and Employment. My first question is, what is the challenge to making the N.W.T. art strategy arm's length, and why was this not initially just put into the art strategy as a deliverable? Thank you.
Thank you, member for Kamloops. Minister responsible for Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The type of Arts Council structure that the member is speaking about, they are usually born out of a grassroots organization, a group of artists that get together and has a vision, has a plan, and it's an organization that then can be supported. There is currently no organization in the territory that has that type of has that ability at this point. There's a number of different organizations, and maybe if they all combine their power, that might be an organization that we might be able to support, but that's just not the case. These are generally grassroots organizations, and the N.W.T has been asked to start a grassroots organization that could turn into an arts council, but that's just not the way things worked. So that is one of the impediments. The other impediment is the fact that the O&M for such an organization would be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. And that is the money currently that goes directly to artists. So we would have to take that from artists, put it towards office space, executive director, travel, all of those types of things. So those are a couple of the impediments. And I will say that the work to, I'll just leave it at that for now. I know the member has more questions. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister, oral questions. Member for Kamloops.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there's another way that we could do this. We could drive it from the N.W.T outwards. It doesn't have to be, continuing on with the whole notion and the age-old anecdote of the starving artist. We can actually prop our artists up, give them an opportunity to bring in huge amounts of dollars into the territory and go at it from a N.W.T perspective, which I think is what a lot of people are asking for, given that the N.W.T already does have a program that supports artists, and we want to be able to see that organization grow. And so I'm wondering, how long will it take the N.W.T to complete the action, quote, explore the creation of an N.W.T Arts Association, and what are the measurable deliverables that the minister sees coming out of that? Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Kamloops. Minister responsible for EC&E.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The work has begun under the art strategy to look at the programs, look at how we fund different organizations, and that is the work to determine whether or not something like an arts council would be the way to go. We provide more funding for the arts and culture in the Northwest Territories than any other jurisdiction in Canada per capita outside of the Yukon. So it's not like we are not providing these supports, but we also we spend twice as much on education per capita as the rest of Canada, 3 times as much on policing. I don't know how much more on health, so there's not unlimited money to go around. And get everything we want. And I've had conversations with a member recently that, we need to really look at what we want to keep, never mind what we want to add. So there are very real budget discussions that we need to have about how we spend our money, and we are doing the work right now to inform those discussions. I don't want to commit $500,000 to support an organization without some real solid grounds to do so. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Kamloops.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I agree with the minister. The N.W.T cannot continue to grow its budget and expand its wallet a whole heck of a lot more than it already is doing. And this is what this organization would do. It would give the artists of the Northwest Territories an opportunity to bring in private and federal public dollars so that we can grow this wallet, so to speak, of N.W.T artists. And so I'm wondering how the N.W.T intends to support Northern artists to fulfill this work of the deliverable from the strategy to explore the creation of an N.W.T Arts Association. How is ECE going to include artists in this conversation to help propel it forward? Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Kamloops. Minister responsible for EC&E.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There will be engagement that's going to happen to get that feedback from artists, and that's going to begin likely early in the new year. So we're going to engage them. We're going to talk to them. We're going to listen. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary. Member for Kamloops.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think I could, well, a lot of my colleagues could probably attest to the fact that I'm slightly hard of hearing, but I'm pretty sure I heard a sigh from a lot of artists of the Northwest Territories on that one. Before I was even elected, before any of us were elected into the 19th Assembly, ITI and ECE did engage with artists across the Northwest Territories. They invested a lot of time and a lot of effort, and it was very well received from the artists of the Northwest Territories. And so I think people will be frustrated in order to go back and say the same things. We want independence, we want infrastructure, we want core funding. These are a lot of the things that we hear. We heard from the member from Yellowknife North say the same thing. And so I'm wondering from the minister then, what will be different this time? Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Kamloops. Minister responsible for EC&E.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And what the member's talking about, it might be, I'm not going to infer too much, but I think the engagement on the art strategy. And she's right, what we heard. We want more funding, more infrastructure, more of basically everything. And the fact is that we can't build a plan based on just more of everything. So we need to go out and say, this is what we have now. These are the pots of money that we have. This is how we fund artists. Is this working? Is this pot of money working? And then from there, we determine perhaps we can put money elsewhere. And it might be in an arts organization to help us access third-party funding. But we need something a little more structured, a little less high level. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Haverford South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. These questions are for the Premier. They are easy ones. Can the Premier confirm the hours and what days the border crossing on Highway 7 is open?
Thank you, Member for Haverford South. Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Actually, I thought that was going to be easy, but it's not quite as easy as I thought. I'd have to get back to the member and find out the exact hours of operation because we have 3 border crossings, so I'm not 100% sure. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do know you can leave anytime. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister, or Honourable Premier. Oral questions. Member for Haverford South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know there's limited hours at that crossing, so when can we see those, when can we expect that the hours would be increased so that they're open, it's open 7 days a week for however many hours a day? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Haverford South. Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The determination of when borders open and when we'll need enforcement is a determination made by the CPHO. However, I can say that the CPHO has been vocal in saying that we're suspecting that by spring that we will be calling off the public health emergency, and if we do that, then there will be no border patrols. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Premier. Oral questions. Member for Haverford South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now for the million-dollar question. We have businesses in the southern N.W.T working further north, and they're traveling back and forth through BC, the Yukon, and working up north and then coming back. And they're finding it costly to go through Grand Prairie and come around. And they have an idea when they're leaving. They know when they're leaving the north to come back this way, and they would like to have access to that border to come through back into either whether it's Hay River, Yellowknife, or Simpson. So I'm wondering if there's any way that those hours or that could be they could be accommodated and supported, so they don't have to make that extra trip and live with those extra costs. And some of them even said, if there was a little cost to have the person go out there and open the gate, they'd be willing to pay for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Haverford South. Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do know that the community was very concerned about COVID, and so I do know that once we reached a certain population that we opened it up a little bit more. But businesses do have to reach out and let us know when they're coming. So we're trying to work with them as much as possible, but we're also trying to make sure that communities are safe. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Premier. Final supplementary. Member for Haverford South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, during the winters, you usually see work on the pipelines, and I'm not sure if there's going to be any work this winter, but I suspect there will be. And there's equipment, coming in from the south, and some of it comes around through Highway 1, while other equipment and goods come through Highway 7. So has the Premier, has the department, I guess, or the Secretary looked at how they could support that by extending those hours at that border crossing when there's a large movement of traffic coming north? Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Haverford South. Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Actually, the border opening was specifically made to address the needs of truckers coming into the communities, needing to drop off supplies, etc. So that's been taken into account. Most of the trucking companies, being almost 2 years, are well aware of the times of operation. If there's anyone that is not, they are required. If they're occasional user, they are required to file a self-isolation plan, and therefore, hopefully, we'll identify what they need, and we can get back to them on that. But if anyone has issues and can't access it and can't get information, let me know, because we're here to help. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Premier. Oral questions, member for Mumphy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For Minister of Education, since 2018, how many Northerners graduated from Aurora College, specifically in nursing, teacher, and social work program?
Thank you, member for Mumphy. Minister responsible for Education, Culture, and Employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I try to stay up on my files, but I don't have that level of specific information for the member right now. I apologize. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions, member for Mumphy.
It's going to be the same reply, but that's okay. How many people in the N.W.T have a grade 12 education and are income support? Thank you.
Thank you, member for Mumphy. Minister responsible for EC&E.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I recommend perhaps a written question or sending these to my office because I don't have that information on hand either. I apologize. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions, member for Education, member for Mumphy.
Okay, another one. So, can the minister provide data showing how many Indigenous teachers, social workers, and nurses are in the N.W.T?
Thank you, member for Mumphy. Minister responsible for EC&E.
Mr. Speaker, I'm unable to produce that data for the member right now. I'm sorry. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary, member for Mumphy.
Okay, but this I think he can answer, okay? So when will the report be completed for the teacher and social work program? When will the Aurora College open the doors to start accepting students for teacher and social work program? Thank you.
Thank you, member for Mumphy. Minister responsible for EC&E.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I expect the earliest those programs could be reinstated would be the 23-24 school year. So not the upcoming school year that would begin in September 22, but the following year. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions, member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to follow up on some of the questions that my colleague from Cam Lake asked. Presently, one of the requirements to get Canadian Council of the Arts funding at a certain level is to have an exhibition in a public art gallery. We are the only jurisdiction right now who does not have a public art gallery. Well, we kind of have one. It's a trailer that drives around to communities and shows public art. But I really think that there's a lowest common denominator here where we could get some sort of space somewhere that meets the criteria of a public art gallery. Is that something we are planning to do anytime soon? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Yellowknife North. Minister responsible for Education, Culture, and Employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prince of Wales Northern Heritage Centre has 2 curated shows a year where they display the work of an artist. I would imagine that would count as an art gallery for the purposes that the member is speaking about. In terms of a public art gallery, building a new public art gallery, there are no plans to build a new public art gallery. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions, member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I heard the minister speak earlier about, usually the arts organizations we're thinking about are grassroots, and then they go and they can access and leverage all this federal funding. And a similar thing exists for museums across the country. Many museums heavily publicly funded, but also receive a lot of federal donations and private donations and have an independent board. And I think this gets to some of the tension about what exactly the Prince of Wales is intended to be and what its mandate is. I think one of the ways to solve that would to also be put the museum arm's length. Is this something the department is considering?
Thank you, member for Yellowknife North. Minister responsible for Education, Culture, and Employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That is being looked into. As the member points out, I think we're probably the only jurisdiction that funds 100% a museum. This is not the way it works. Most museums in most jurisdictions are funded by organizations outside of government who can access millions of dollars from the federal government, from private organizations, etc. So yes, we are looking into this. we have to keep in mind that the Prince of Wales also contains a significant amount of office space for the GNWT, and it contains a territorial archive. So there are considerations, but it's definitely something that we are looking into because it could be an avenue to accessing additional funding. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister, oral questions. Member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I heard the minister speak earlier about, we don't necessarily have a bunch of new funding for the arts strategy, and we have to look at what we're spending right now and evaluate that. And my understanding is how these things usually go is we do a strategy, and then sometimes we do a framework or an action plan. Can the minister just speak to whether there is some subsequent document coming out of the arts strategy, and will it have any funding attached to it? Thank you.
Thank you, member for Yellowknife North. Minister responsible for EC&E.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So after one of the first things in the art strategy is to review all of the different funding and how it's working. Now, I had the option to just not put out an art strategy, and I considered that because I knew that people would want something a little more concrete and specific, and I thought, well, we can just do this work without sort of telling the public what we're undertaking. But I thought, no, for the sake of transparency, let's release the strategy, say this is our plan. It's going to take some time, but it's our plan. And then after we take some of those steps in that plan, we'll be able to put out some concrete actions. And so what I expect after we do the evaluation of the funding is a plan to show how we are going to distribute that funding. So I'm not going to say that it's going to include new funding. It could, the case could be that what we have used in a different way is sufficient. So there definitely will be something more pointed and concrete in the future coming from this. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister, final supplementary. Member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I guess I'm going to try once again with my questions from the member of Cam Lake. I think the minister makes a great point of if you can put the museum arm's length, it can leverage more funding. Presently, we have a bunch of art staff working in G&WT as public servants. We have an arts council that distributes funding. I don't see how it costs any money to take all of that out of the public service and give it to an arm's length body that can then leverage public funding. In fact, I think we could probably save some money if we could do that. Is the minister willing to make the Arts Council arm's length? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Yellowknife North. Minister responsible for education, culture, and employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There is one person in the GNWT who, as part of their duties, works with the Arts Council to distribute that money. That is not enough money to fund an executive director and an office in downtown Yellowknife. And never mind the additional funds for travel, for everything else. So no, at this point, I'm not willing to do that. It would not be a good use of our funds. There's other jurisdictions in Canada who operate in the same manner that we do. We are not unique in this sense. So it's not like there is one gold standard for the arts councils. So at this point, I'm not willing to say yes, but in the future, who knows? Let's look into it and see what we can find out and see if we can arrange our money in a way that we can support an organization to bring in this countless millions that is apparently out there and free for the taking for third-party arts organizations. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Oral questions. Member for N.W.T. Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, one of our priorities of the Assembly is to ensure government procurement and contracting maximizes benefits to residents and businesses. As the government is going through their procurement review to deal with this mandate item, they have many ways to do this, and I also understand that there are times when the N.W.T. does not have the expertise or service required. But my question for the Minister of Finance is, can the Minister commit to ensuring that the process for the G&W.T. public tendering, that there are mechanisms in place that ensure that businesses in the N.W.T., and when possible, that is done in ways to ensure that it maximizes the money staying in the N.W.T.? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for N.W.T. Lakes. Minister responsible for finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that indeed does essentially restate the obligation that is on us because of the mandate, and not because of the mandate, but thanks to the mandate. It is an articulation of a priority that we all came together here and found, and it's one of Cabinet's priorities as well in terms of maximizing benefits to Northerners. So that is exactly what we want to try to do. How it's going to come down, what that's going to look like, is the exact process we're in right now. So I hope that's enough of an almost yes for the member for today. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions, member for Twin Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So going down that same path, can the minister also commit to the same mechanism when doing negotiated contracts? Because we need to ensure that the work is going to N.W.T residents and businesses, whether it's local businesses, contractors, and or with Indigenous governments. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Twin Lakes. Minister responsible for finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the more specific we get, the less I'm probably able to make commitments here on the floor. The negotiated contracts policy right now, which is actually a policy of EIA, not finance, not ITI, not infrastructure, not procurement shared services, is one that is meant to provide a tool or a mechanism by which we could go directly to Indigenous government. But of course, as soon as there's more than one business that comes and requests a contract under a negotiated contract policy, the assumption is it goes to public tender. The result of that being that we often wind up not being able to use that tool in the way that it was perhaps intended. So it is certainly one of the things that I think has been identified as, again, would be beneficial to have under one umbrella, would be beneficial to have a unified sense of the objectives and purpose, namely to ensure that we are keeping benefits in the north, and to make sure that the tool is actually achieving that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions, member for Twin Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm also concerned that the N.W.T provides significant amounts of public funding to Crown corporations, and we've heard in this House in the capital budget of the millions and millions of dollars that flow through to our Crown corporation. Yet those corporations are not held by the same procurement policies of the N.W.T. So will the minister commit to include consideration of Crown corporations or speak with her cabinet colleagues to commit to this consideration of Crown corporation procurement policies in the N.W.T's procurement review? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Twin Lakes. Minister responsible for finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I am not a minister responsible for one of the Crown corporations, so I certainly want to be cautious in that regard. Now, that said, we are certainly operating on a whole-of-government approach, and I am able to work closely with my colleague, the minister who is responsible, and I think perhaps here the messaging is really largely around the Northwest Territories Power Corporation. So they are not right now subject to the same procurement policies, just as they are not subject to the same human resources policies. And as to whether or not they might then want to look at what we're doing with our procurement, that will be up to them. It would require amendments. So, Mr. Speaker, I can certainly, I'd say I would take it up with my colleague, but I suspect that the minister has already heard the question and might know that it may well be coming her way someday soon. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary, member for Twin Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's another minister who has a huge Crown corporation with huge dollars too, so it's not just one member. And the other thing is that this is where the deputy ministers, as not deputy ministers, as board members who control these Crown corporations, they know our mandate. They know what we're trying to achieve here. They know that these Crown corporations are fully funded majority by everything that's approved through this House. So I ask again to the Minister of Finance, as I'm only directing to one minister, that they take a look at committing, that they look at the Crown corporations and in this review and looking at the policies that they do have to make sure that they're applicable to what we stand for as this 19th Assembly, and ensuring that this money and the work is staying in the Northwest Territories. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Twin Lakes. Minister responsible for finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yeah, Mr. Speaker, this is now definitely probably outside the realm of anything I have the expertise to speak to. I mean, again, though, in terms of procurement in the Northwest Territories and achieving the goal of maximizing benefits to residents and to businesses, maximizing keeping keeping dollars circulating in the North, that is a mandate for the whole of government. It's a mandate that applies to every one of the ministers, not just to me. And I am quite confident that the working group that we have set up to do procurement review for the N.W.T can and I'm sure has, but can certainly engage with Crown corporations to see, in fact, perhaps they have their own best practices that might be beneficial to us, or vice versa, that we can in turn share with them the work that we're doing. So that much there I can certainly commit to, that we ensure that sharing is happening. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I would like to go back to the Minister of ITI about the secret meetings of the N.W.T Chamber of Mines Working Group. The meeting summaries appear to show that a draft list of critical minerals and proposed actions on critical minerals has already been shared with the Chamber. ITI indicates that, quote, "we won't engage on it much when it is released," end of quote. Can the Minister explain what is going on here with critical minerals and what commitments may have already been made? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Frame Lake. Minister responsible for industry, tourism and investment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, again, I don't like to get into a battle of somebody's notes that they might have taken that weren't a transcript, but just to give some context here, what that says is that the first steps are glossy, high-level goals, and it does say these will be short and high-level, emphasizing again that that's the rationale, that this isn't something where we're engaging in strategic planning or a framework or an action plan. It really is meant to be a discussion. Mr. Speaker, the Critical Minerals Workshop, in a lot of ways, was something that started because a year and some ago, when I assumed this portfolio, I started talking about critical minerals as something that we needed to be looking at, that we were going to be behind the 8 ball if we in the Northwest Territories weren't looking at this. It was happening elsewhere. Canada and the United States already has a joint action strategy on critical minerals. Where's the Northwest Territories, given the dependence we have on the mineral resource industry? So with that in mind, the department moved forward, had the workshop, and there's been no talk at this stage, certainly, that we're going to go off and develop our own list. Canada already has a list. The department's officials are working with Canada in on their strategies and on their actions, and certainly bringing everyone into that fold to see what's on Canada's list, to see what's on the shared list with the United States, and to see where we would fit in. That's the level of engagement that's been had thus far. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I want to thank the Minister for trying to explain those notes to me. In the meeting summaries, there's also some sort of a pan-territorial investment study underway to support subsidies or grants to the mining industry. The Chamber appears to have changed the terms of reference, influenced who was interviewed, and has been given advanced drafts of the study. Can the Minister explain what is going on with this study and when the public and even regular MLAs may get a say in this work? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Frame Lake. Minister responsible for ITI.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is work that was done by the 3 territories jointly along with the federal government, and funding was provided accordingly. The statement of work, requirement of work, was drafted jointly by the 3 territories. I think that was a working group, in fact, and then with funding. So as the project went on underway, was already conceptualized, most certainly they did go and ask industry who should be participating. The purpose of the study was to determine how to increase investment in exploration and the mineral resource sector in the 3 territories. Mr. Speaker, this is, of course, also not the first time that we've had the opportunity to speak about this, the member and I have been going back to see when we can get this document available. The delay was not on our end. We had 3 partners involved, as well as funders from the federal government. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to say I think I am going to be able to bring that matter and may in fact be able to table at this session, that report, and be able to table at this session. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I want to thank the Minister for that commitment to table the report. It's evident from the meeting summaries that the Chamber of Mines is pressing both the federal and N.W.T governments to provide legally binding policy direction to co-management bodies to, quote, fix the grassroots exploration investment identified in the audit, end of quote. Can the Minister explain what sort of policy direction is being sought by the Chamber and whether our government is going to do that to these independent co-management bodies? Must see, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Frame Lake. Minister responsible for ITI.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the perception that the regulatory framework of the Northwest Territories is complex is also not new, but the regulatory framework we have here is one that's developed through co-management. It's one that once a company gets through it, the process is clear and certain, and they know that they will have gone through a process that involves involvement with Indigenous governments, and it's one that really meets very high ESG standards, environmental, social, and government standards. So we're alive to the concerns that are being raised, and we want to try to support and assist industry to get through our regulatory system so that they have a good product once they do. There is, Mr. Speaker, one thing, there is the Mackenzie Valley Operational Dialogue. It is something on which the Government of Northwest Territories participates, the board participates, industry participates, and this is not policy change, Mr. Speaker. It's looking at ways that we can already use what we're doing today, that the board can use their tools that they have at their disposal to ensure that when decisions are made or that when processes are underway, that they're being done in a way that's respectful and that makes sense for small-scale projects, but it's not policy change, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary, Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I want to thank the Minister again for that information. I'm not aware of any other economic sector or non-governmental organization that has been able to have such privileged access with so little transparency. Last week we heard the member for Great Slave call for a working group for the tourism sector. And we had the Business Advisory Council. The Minister tabled the terms of the membership of this working group, but the members for the Chamber of Mines were blacked out. Can the Minister tell us whether any other economic sector or non-governmental organizations have such meetings without any public scrutiny or other stakeholders at the table? Must see, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Frame Lake. Minister responsible for ITI.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there are meetings between officials happening across sectors. So the Department of Industry, Tourism and Investment in particular meets with Northwest Territories Tourism on a very regular basis. They are funded to do the majority of the marketing on behalf of the Northwest Territories and are really a key partner involved in understanding what's happening in that industry. So while I understood last week's conversation to be about maybe reaching out individually to some of the operators who might not be as directly involved in the Tourism Association, I certainly didn't understand that there was any desire to lessen the number of meetings that are had with the N.W.T Tourism Association. Similarly, the fish strategy and the work on the Great Slave fish revitalization came about largely because of the very direct and regular meetings that also happened between fishers and members and officials at ITI, and in particular now with the Tucho. They, again, meet regularly. And I don't know that really the intent here is to walk through every division and department of the economic side or the economic branch of the Department of ITI. Mr. Speaker, I can say for myself, I don't know that I have turned down any meeting, whether it was with a development corporation, whether it was with a particular organization, whether it was with an advocacy group, the Construction Association, it's so important to stay live and involved on what's happening across the territory and across the industries. We're going to continue to do that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Kamloops.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my questions are for the Minister of ECE. In October, the Financial Post published an article speaking to a 300% surge in propane prices. This was reflective of prices seen in Edmonton, just south of us. And so I'm wondering if the Minister of ECE has seen any increases to propane costs in the Northwest Territories specific to the seniors' home heating subsidy. Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Kamloops. Minister responsible for Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've seen the article the member is referring to. I don't believe that 300% increase is a retail price that people are paying. And I think it's probably related to the fact that the price of propane plummeted last year. and it is now back to more normal levels. So we are seeing a slight increase in the cost of propane. It's around 10% from 2 years ago, although significantly higher than last year, but it is more closely, it's closer to the average right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Cam Lake.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when we heard previously a lot in this House about how the change in policy from a number of liters on an annual basis for the seniors' home heating subsidy was changed to a dollar amount on an annual basis, and the impact that that had on seniors. So even a 10% increase would have an impact on the amount of fuel a senior could access to heat their home. So how is this even 10% increase expected to have an impact on seniors across the Northwest Territories? Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Cam Lake. Minister responsible for EC&E.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker knows all about this. I recall in the last Assembly, this this hit his constituents hard because there was an increase in fuel prices that was quite abrupt, and the change in the way that this was funded didn't quite account for that. So what we did last year, actually, was we increased the amount that seniors are eligible for, and members in this House should remember that. So there was an increase. I also want to say that despite the fact that there is a monetary amount now associated with this, there is a cap. A number of instances have come across my desk as minister where members' constituents couldn't afford fuel. They had used up their entire home heating subsidy amount, and they still needed fuel. And in every one of those cases, they were able to get income assistance to support them. I know there's some stigma associated with applying for income assistance, but that is there to help people. We don't want you to freeze in the winter. And in every instance where people needed fuel that I saw, they were able to get it through that program. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Cam Lake.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the Minister's anecdote about ECE and income assistance being able to help out so that seniors aren't going without. I'm wondering if that is a separate application process or if that is a back-end process that is handled by the staff at ECE so that, I guess, undue administrative burdens aren't being placed on seniors. Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Cam Lake. Minister responsible for EC&E.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is a separate process, but it is still income security staff, so they are able to assist with that. I want to point out that this is one of the reasons why the department is dedicated to creating a separate stream for seniors in terms of income security, because why should someone have to go and apply for multiple things to get one thing? So that work is ongoing and should come to fruition before the end of this Assembly. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary. Member. Oral questions. Oral questions. Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I want to ask some questions to the Minister of Infrastructure, and I apologize. I didn't know I was going to have an opportunity to do this today. So I understand from a news release that the department has put out that there's some cold weather testing of a light armored helicopter happening out at the Yellowknife Airport. Can the minister tell us whether we have any criteria for the use of the Yellowknife Airport when it comes to cold weather testing? Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Frame Lake. Minister responsible for infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm not aware that we have anything in place, and I appreciate the member coming with no notice, but I can get back to the member on that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister, oral questions. Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. And I want to apologize to the minister for catching her a little bit cold-footed, but I guess I've had some concerns raised with me about whether we do actually have any criteria for the use of the airport. One time in the early 1980s, this government actually took a principled stand against cruise missile testing in our territory, and I understand that this is a military weapon that is actually being tested at the airport. So can the minister commit, if there is no criteria, to actually develop a set of criteria for cold weather testing at our airport? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Frame Lake. Minister responsible for infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I can look to and get back to the member if we do have requirements. I do want to make note that I was told that the helicopter is not armed, if that makes the member feel any better, or the city. But I can look into it and just maybe determine how much work is involved in actually coming up with this policy. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Oral questions. Member for Mumphy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Okay, this is for the Department of Finance. To date, how much money has the N.W.T spent on relocation costs to hire non-N.W.T residents for employment in school within the last 5 years?
Thank you, Member for Mumphy. Minister responsible for finance.
Get those answers on the
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I don't have that number here. I will go back to the department and see what information we can pull and what data we can pull. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Mumphy. Oral questions. Oral questions. Member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The federal government, after a series of review, recommended best practices for Crown corporations was to not have public servants sit on their board. The federal government passed a number of recommendations. In our own situation, I think it's very likely that our Power Corp will be asking for a rate increase to the Public Utilities Board, and I really think it confuses the issue of whether we are responsible for rate increases or whether the Power Corp is, when the board is made up entirely of deputy ministers. So my question for the minister responsible for the Northwest Territories Power Corporation is, when are we going to remove the deputy ministers from the Power Corp board? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Member for Yellowknife North, Minister responsible for the Northwest Territories Power Corporation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you know, the Board of Directors, yes, they are made up of deputy ministers within the government, and we are doing a review of the Northwest Territories Corporation. The Territorial Hydro Corporation Act states that the Board of Directors of Northwest Territories Powers are is designated as the board for the power, the Hydro Corporation. The work that we're doing is looking into the review of what does this consist of, what's the how much it would cost, and yeah, that's what we're doing. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Perhaps the minister can provide the House with an update of when that review is expected to be complete.
Thank you, Member for Yellowknife North. Minister responsible for the Northwest Territories Power Corporation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that work is ongoing. The governance review is going to take time. We are hoping for the session right after the new year. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Oral questions. Oral questions. Member for Frame Lake.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. I do have some questions for the Minister of Environment and Natural Resources. Again, I haven't given him a heads up, but look, it's in the media now that the federal government is developing some regulations to allow for the release of water from the oil sands in Alberta. Of course, they would flow downstream into past our communities, including Fort Smith. So can the minister tell us what involvement, if any, our government has had in the development of these regulations? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Frame Lake. Minister responsible for Environment and Natural Resources.
Thank you. Usually the member gives me the question ahead of time, but this is good. I actually had a conversation with our staff just recently about this very topic. So we've reached out to the federal minister to have this conversation about trying to get a position on the board. We've had communications with the Alberta government to work on this. So we are having these dialogues back and forth with the minister of Alberta, as well as the federal minister, and we're trying to get this resolved. This has been a very long issue for not just only the member, but our Indigenous governments across the territories, all the way up from the Bodal all the way down to Fort Smith. So we've heard them, we've heard the concerns. We are working with them within the system we have presently. So we are on a plate, I guess, communicating back and forth with the letter, and there will be another letter being sent out probably within the next week or so. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I want to ask thanks to the Minister for that. Can he commit to share a copy of this letter that he's sending with the regular MLAs, even on a confidential basis, so that we're aware of what's being requested and how we might be engaged in the development of these regulations moving forward? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Frame Lake. Minister responsible for ENR.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's not Yellowknife North asking the question today. We will look it back. I do not want to make a commitment here in the House to say that we will share. I don't see why not, but we want to make sure we do it right. So I will reach out back to talk to the department, have the frank conversations on what we can and cannot share, and then we'll get back to the House with that answer. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I want to thank the Minister for that. Can he tell us, though, a little bit more about the development of these federal regulations? What impact might that have on our transboundary water agreement with the Government of Alberta, given that there could be emissions that have, like these tailings ponds are huge. They've been storing water for years. It looks like there's a desire now to start to release this in light of some of the flooding that's been happening and climate change and so on. So what impact is this going to have on our transboundary water agreement with the Government of Alberta? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Frame Lake. Minister responsible for Environment and Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, for that detail, I'm going to have to reach out to the department. I mean, that there involves a lot of people, departments. We need to find out, because right now I know the Alberta government's talking about it, but we've been reached out to them. We're not supportive of this presently or even in the future. So we need to reach out to the federal minister and to the Alberta minister to get that information. But for further detail for the question that the member asked, that there is going to involve some research. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary. Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I want to thank the Minister for that. Can he commit to sharing this research with the regular members? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Frame Lake. Minister responsible for Environment and Natural Resources.
Thank you. I will get back to the members and the committee, House Getty, with the information that we're able to provide. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Colleagues, our time for oral questions has expired. Written questions. Written questions. Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Map staking versus claim staking for mineral rights. My question is for the Minister of Industry, Tourism and Investment, who is responsible for both promoting the mining industry and regulating it. During the development of the Mineral Rights Act, there was a commitment from the Government of the Northwest Territories to implement map staking as the method for acquiring mineral rights. The department is also committed to spend $3.7 million developing a mineral administration and registry system to facilitate map staking, a fundamental change to the way in which mineral rights are secured. This will likely require a careful balance between the economic interests of small prospectors, claim post manufacturers, expediters, charter aircraft operators versus mining companies with the capital to tie up large areas without significant work commitments. How is the Department of Industry, Tourism and Investment going to balance these competing interests? And 1, please provide a summary of the representation work requirements for mineral claims since devolution, including the number of active mineral claims, value of the representation work completed, number of claims lapsed due to a failure to perform representation work, and the value of that representation work that would have occurred. 2, please explain how the value of the work that would normally go into claim staking will be dealt with under map staking to prevent speculation and/or be converted into actual exploration work. 3, please provide any economic analysis of the impacts of moving from claim staking to map staking that has been conducted by or for the department. And 4, please provide a full description of the public engagement that the department intends to undertake as part of any move from claim staking to map staking, including the steps, timelines, and specific opportunities for public input. Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Frame Lake. Written questions. Written questions. Returns to written questions. Returns to written questions. Replies to Commissioner's address. Replies to Commissioner's address. Petitions. Petitions. Tabling of documents. Minister responsible for Environment and Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the following 4 documents: N.W.T. Climate Change Action Plan, Annual Report 2020-2021, N.W.T. Water Stewardship Strategy Action Plan 2021 to 2025, N.W.T. Water Stewardship Strategy Action Plan 2021-2025 Plain Language Summary and Response to Climate Change, and the N.W.T. Plain Language Overview Report 2020-2021. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Tabling of documents. Tabling of documents. Minister responsible for Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the following document, Northwest Territories Carbon Tax Report 2020-2021. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Tabling of documents. Tabling of documents. Minister responsible for Infrastructure.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the following 2 documents: N.W.T. Energy Initiatives Report 2020-2021 and a follow-up letter for oral questions 7A2-19 bracket 2, N.W.T. Power Corporation COVID-19 vaccination policy. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Tabling of documents. Tabling of documents. Minister responsible for Justice.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the following document: Plain Language Summary for Bill 41, Justice Administration Statutes Amendment Act. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Tabling of documents. Tabling of documents. Colleagues, I wish to table the reorganized rules of the Legislative Assembly of the Northwest Territories dated December 2021. Tabling of documents. Tabling of documents. Pursuant to Section 31.1 of the Legislative and Executive Council Act, I hereby table the 2021 Review of Members' Compensation and Benefits prepared by the Independent Commission to Review Members' Compensation and Benefits dated August 5th, 2021. Tabling of documents. Tabling of documents. Notices of motion. Notices of motion. Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I give notice that on Thursday, December 9th, 2021, I'll move the following motion. Now, therefore, I move, seconded by the Honourable Member for Hay River North, that the following members be appointed as alternate members of the Board of Management: Mr. Rocky Simpson, the member for Hay River South, and Mrs. Carolyn Cochran, the member for Range Lake. And further, that the following members be appointed to the Standing Committee on Government Operations: Mrs. Lisa Semler, the member for Inuvik Twin Lakes; Ms. Caitlin Cleveland, the member for Cam Lake; Mrs. Frida Marcellus, the member for Thabacha; and Mr. Ryland Johnson, the member for Yellowknife North. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Frame Lake. Notices of motion. Notices of motion. Member for Thabacha.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I give notice that on Thursday, December the 9th, 2021, I will move the following motion. Now, therefore, I move, second by the Honourable Member for Hay River North, that this Legislative Assembly repeal the rules of the Legislative Assembly of the Northwest Territories originally adopted on February the 12th, 2021, and adopt the newest version of the rules of the Legislative Assembly of the Northwest Territories, identified as Table Document 527-19 bracket 2. And further, that these new rules of the Legislative Assembly of the Northwest Territories, upon adoption of this motion, come into effect February 2nd, 2022. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Thabacha. Notices of motion. Notices of motion. Member for Thabacha.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I give notice that on Thursday, December the 9th, 2021, I will move the following motion. I move, second by the Honourable Member for Hay River North, that notwithstanding Rule 4, when this House adjourns on Thursday, December the 9th, 2021, it shall be adjourned until Wednesday, February the 2nd, 2022. And further, that any time prior to February 2nd, 2022, if the Speaker is satisfied after consultation with the Executive Council and members of the Legislative Assembly, that the public interest requires that the House should meet at an earlier time during the adjournment or at a time later than the scheduled resumption of the House, the Speaker may give notice, and thereupon the House shall meet at the time stated in such notice and shall transact into business as if it had been duly adjourned to that time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Thabacha. Notices of motion. Notices of motion. Motions. Motions. Member for Kamlik.
Mr. Speaker, whereas Section 40.2 brackets 1 of the Public Service Act provides that the Commissioner, on the recommendation of the Legislative Assembly, shall appoint an equal pay Commissioner as an officer of the Legislative Assembly who is responsible for exercising the powers and performing the duties set out in the Act, and whereas the position of Equal Pay Commissioner became vacant on November 30th, 2021, and whereas the Board of Management was tasked with recruiting an Equal Pay Commissioner and has recommended an individual to the Legislative Assembly, and the Legislative Assembly is prepared to make a recommendation. Now therefore I move, seconded by the Honourable Member for Inuvik-Boot Lake, that Ms. Bronwyn Waters be appointed as the Equal Pay Commissioner in accordance with the Public Service Act by the Commissioner of the Northwest Territories as recommended by the Legislative Assembly. And further, that the Speaker be authorized to communicate the effective date of the appointment to the Commissioner. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Kamlik. Motion is in order to the motion. Question has been called. All those in favour? All those opposed? Any abstentions? Motion is carried. Motions. Motions. Member for Nunukput.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Whereas on Tuesday, November 30th, 2021, Committee Report 2022-19 brackets 2, Standing Committee on Economic Development and Environment Report on Telecommunications was read into the record. Now therefore I move, second by the Honourable Member from Frame Lake, that the Committee Report 22-19 brackets 2, Standing Committee on Economic Development and Environment Report on Telecommunications be received and referred to the Committee of the Whole for their consideration. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Member for Nunukput. Motion is in order to the motion. Question has been called. All those in favour? All those opposed? Any abstentions? The motion is carried. The report 22-19 brackets 2 will be moved into Committee of the Whole. Motions. Motions. Notices of motion for the first reading of bills. Notices of motion for the first reading of bills. First reading of bills. First reading of bills. Second reading of bills. Second reading of bills. Minister responsible for justice.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the Honourable Member for Inuvik-Boot Lake, that Bill 41, Justice Administration Statutes Amendment Act, be read for the second time. This Act amends 3 statutes administered by the Department of Justice. It amends the Jury Act and the Summary Conviction Procedures Act to reflect changes made to the Criminal Code of Canada. It further amends the Summary Conviction Procedures Act to clarify the role of the Attorney General for the Northwest Territories under that Act. It also amends the Partnership and Business Names Act to recognize the authority of an Indian band to be a limited partner in a limited partnership. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Motion is in order and is non-debatable to the principle of the bill. Question has been called. All those in favour? All those opposed? Any abstentions? The motion is carried. Bill 41 has had second reading and is referred to a committee. Second reading of bills. Second reading of bills. Consideration in Committee of the Whole of Bills and Other Matters, Bill 23, 29, and 30, Committee Report 20-19 brackets 2, Committee Report 21-19 brackets 2, Table Document 437-19 brackets 2 with member for Nivik Twin Lakes in the chair.
Call Committee of the Whole to order. What is the wish of committee? Member for Frame Lake.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Committee would like to consider table document 437-19 brackets 2, capital estimates 2022, 2023, committee report 22-19 brackets 2, report on telecommunications, committee report 20-19 brackets 2, report on Bill 30, an act to amend the Aurora College Act, and Bill 30, an act to amend the Aurora College Act. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, member for Frame Lake. Does committee agree? Thank you, committee. We'll take a short recess and start with the first item. I'll now call Committee of the Whole back to order. Committee, we've agreed to resume consideration of table document 437-19-2, capital estimates 2022-2023. We have previously considered and concluded all the departments. To begin our consideration, I will go to the Minister of Finance for some comments. Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I do have some closing remarks I'd like to make. I wanted to begin, Madam Chair, by thanking the members for their consideration of the capital estimates and for the productive discussions that we had in advance of seeing these estimates, I hope, move forward later today. Capital estimates certainly are an important part of the budget for our territory's economy, and I do appreciate members' challenging questions and their testing of that budget. Madam Chair, I also very much appreciated the whole of territory approach that was clearly applied to the capital estimates. I believe that the members of the Legislative Assembly recognize that when one community or one region are strong, that we are all stronger together. As a result, our discussions of these estimates was not about advancing one region's projects ahead of another, but of ensuring strategic infrastructure investments continue to be made across the Northwest Territories. Madam Chair, earlier today, MLA Matsalos mentioned cohesion, unity, and trust, and in my view, the discussions that we had with respect to this budget reflect those values. There was a focus on getting the strategic work done, and in doing so, maximizing benefits to Northerners. Members were strong advocates on several points, and I have made a commitment before coming today that my ministerial colleagues and I will work to ensure that small capital projects are prioritized for attention, knowing that these projects are likely to provide employment and income to Northerners and Northern businesses. This will also include messaging to all departments and regions to ensure annual small capital allocations are effectively utilized and maximized to achieve not only the goal of strategic infrastructure, but of economic support across communities. I am also committed to ensure MLAs, including our regional and community governments, are aware of upcoming projects anticipated for their region. Members have also remained consistent in their advocacy to continue to improve the availability of housing across the Northwest Territories. This is a priority clearly shared by all members of this Legislative Assembly. I have heard committee's concerns regarding the presentation of the Northwest Territories Housing Corporation's capital estimates, and I am committed to work with the minister responsible for the Housing Corporation to ensure that these concerns are addressed in future capital budgets. I have also committed to provide information to MLAs about the long-term cash flow on strategic housing projects, including the RCMP housing. I acknowledge committee's concerns about the length of time required for the proposed procurement changes to be implemented. I've committed to provide more details for MLAs about the procurement review critical path and have done so. The next steps for us are to follow through on work that is happening right now with Indigenous governments to ensure that our future policy incorporates specific provisions for Indigenous procurement. These consultations and ongoing analysis of the recommendations will continue through the early part of 2022, with a view to seeing at least some fruits of these labours implemented during the 2022 calendar year. I am committed to remain focused on these improvements to the N.W.T's procurement policies, and I assure committee that we have dedicated resources allocated to this work that will allow us to continue to expedite these efforts. For example, Madam Chair, I am pleased to inform and confirm with committee that vendor performance management is included in the Department of Finance's annual business plan, and that work has already started to implement this program. In June of 2021, Phase 1 began on construction contracts greater than $250,000, and a system change to allow for the entry of actual and planned business incentive policy or BIP obligations on contracts. This change allows the N.W.T to track contract information within its financial system instead of being done on paper. The goal of this change is to ensure that contractors are aware of their obligations under BIP and can be held accountable to those obligations with better reporting. The next phase of vendor performance management is to develop and implement a policy with penalties for contractors for non-compliance with their BIP obligations. Once the policy has been developed, the department can extend the project and the program to more contracts. And again, committee has made it clear that ensuring adherence to contract requirements for Northern hiring is a priority. I commit to continuing to monitor these efforts closely and will commit to provide members updates as progress is made. Another area of the consistent advocacy of the members has been in regards to ensuring support for community governments, especially as a result of ongoing expenditures by these governments in response to COVID-19. In September 2021, communities received a letter from the Minister of Municipal and Community Affairs that provided information on funding provided to communities with respect to COVID-related expenditures. The Minister of MACA had previously committed to reviewing the financial impact of community government's COVID-19 pandemic response as part of the 2021-22 year-end financial process. So although we recognize this is not an issue for the current capital estimates, I commit to continuing to work with the MACA Minister to ensure an informed funding request can be considered. Further, and last, the GNWT's response to the burden currently imposed on healthcare workers as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic has been a focus of strong and consistent advocacy by MLAs. There are a number of things happening right now to respond to this situation, including 2 items being worked on by the GNWT. The first of which is market adjustment policy, to provide parameters within which a department, including Health and Social Services, may determine whether additional pay should be temporarily used to recruit and retain staff whose work is essential to preserving the health or safety of people of the Northwest Territories. And the second is an additional childcare support for frontline healthcare professionals who may have had to report to their work sites during periods when schools or day homes were closed due to outbreaks. Madam Chair, this concludes my remarks. Again, I do want to thank members for their review of the 2022-23 capital estimates. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Members, are there any comments? Member for Frame Lake.
Thanks, Madam Chair. And I do want to sincerely thank the Minister of Finance for her concluding remarks. I don't have anything nearly as eloquent or prepared, so but I certainly do appreciate, the work that the minister does on behalf of, Cabinet in the review of the capital estimates. So this is my, I've been here 6 years. I want the public to know that this kind of collaborative discussion did not happen in the last Assembly when it came to either the capital or the main estimates. And it's certainly very much appreciated. I think it's a different way of doing business compared to the last Assembly. So I want to give full marks to my colleagues on the other side of the House for, we have a Cabinet that's actually, that is interested in working with regular MLAs, and I think this is proof of that again. People often wonder what happens in this place. And I don't even know, I don't think I know half the time either, but I think this is clearly an example of the kind of work that Cabinet and regular MLAs can do together in the interest of all of our residents. When and budgets, one of the most important things we do as MLAs is, decide where to spend money. And it does involve tough decisions. It does involve setting priorities. And I don't always agree with those necessarily, but I think this was an example of the kind of collaborative work that can and should be happening here. So, of course, we have given our colleagues on the other side heads up that we do want to see more investment in housing for our residents, and we'd like to find ways to close the municipal funding gap as well. But I think that the minister has laid out a number of other policy commitments here that I think really do start to raise the bar and set a good precedent for how we can work together on the capital estimates. And of course, we do look forward to further details, particularly on the market adjustment that the minister has committed to with regard to support for our healthcare workers during the pandemic. Clearly, I think this is really an example of how consensus government can and should work. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Member. Do we have any other general comments? Seeing none. Committee, do you agree that this concludes consideration of table document 437-19 to Capital estimates 2022-2023. Member for Frame Lake.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I move that consideration of table document 437-19 brackets 2, main estimates 2022-2023 be now concluded, and that table document 437-19 brackets 2 be reported and recommended as ready for further consideration in formal session through the form of an appropriation bill. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Motion is in order to the motion. Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? The motion is carried. Table document 437-19-2 will be reported as ready for consideration in formal session through the form of an appropriation bill. Committee, we've now agreed to consider Committee Report 22-19-2, Report on Telecommunications. I will go to the Chair of Standing Committee on Economic Development Environment for any opening comments. Member for Nunavut.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The committee recommends that the government Northwest Territories continue to invest in publicly owned backbone internet infrastructure in the Northwest Territories, and further specifically, the government of the Northwest Territories should prioritize the opportunity to create fiber redundancy in the Northwest Territories. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I will now open the floor to general comments on Committee Report 20-19-2, Report on Telecommunications. Member for Frame Lake.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to relay very quickly my thanks as a member of the committee for the work that was done on the report. We did hear from a number of different internet service providers and from the Department of Finance that tends to have responsibility for information technology within our government and manages some of the projects related to access and affordability of telecommunication services in the N.W.T. So, committee spent a fair bit of time listening to different people and interests on this issue. There was a submission made to the Canadian Radio Telecommunications Committee in Ottawa as well in their proceeding. And now what you see here are a series of recommendations from the committee to try to increase access and affordability for all of our residents in the Northwest Territories. And I think this can and should be a much higher priority for our government moving forward, and should be a priority in terms of securing investment from the federal government to support the work that's needed to ensure that we have the same sort of internet telecommunications services, or at least access to them, as most other Canadians enjoy. But I'm happy to support the recommendations from the committee that are going to be moved as motions. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I too do support this bill. It was one of the first, this report and recommendations. It was one of the first ones that I worked on with this committee. And one thing I've noticed with the pandemic, it is really highlighting the division in our territory of the have and have-nots, and the need for infrastructure. I'm often pushing for the road infrastructure, which I think is just as critical, but the internet infrastructure and the telecommunications is key as well. If we don't address this issue now, we're only going to have our have-nots fall further behind. They won't be able to access the same level of schooling, the telehealth. It spans all of our departments, and if there's one area besides roads I think we should be investing in, it's definitely our telecommunications. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Member for Great Slave. Seeing no further comments, Mr. Jacobson.
Madam Chair, I move that the committee recommends that the government of the Northwest Territories ensure fiber optic in the home is made available for Tuktoyaktuk residents at the completion of the N.W.T Tuktoyaktuk fiber line installation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
we're going to go back to Member for Nunukput.
I move that the committee recommends that the government of Northwest Territories continue to invest publicly owned backbone internet infrastructure in the Northwest Territories. And further, specifically, the government of Northwest Territories should prioritize the opportunity to create the fiber redundancy in the Northwest Territories. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Member. The motion is in order. To the motion? Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? Abstentions? The motion is carried. Member for Nunukput.
I move the committee recommends that the government of Northwest Territories ensure fiber optic is made available in Tuktoyaktuk for the residents at completion of the Nunavut to Tuktoyaktuk fiber line installation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. The motion is in order. To the motion? Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? Abstaining? The motion is carried. Member for Nunukput.
I move that the committee recommends that the government of Northwest Territories ensure all backbone internet infrastructure in communities accommodates open wholesale access to the N.W.T businesses to co-locate internet services and a fair price to N.W.T businesses. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Member. The motion is in order. To the motion. Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? Abstentions? The motion is carried. Member for Nunukput.
Madam Chair, I move that the committee recommends that the government of the Northwest Territories advocate for Canadian Radio Telecommunications Commission to set aside funding under the Broadband Fund for smaller service providers and Indigenous-owned businesses to help promote competition. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. The motion is in order. To the motion. Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? Abstentions? The motion is carried. Member for Nunukput.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that the committee recommends that the government of the Northwest Territories ensure all publicly funded internet backbone infrastructure in the community in the N.W.T provide wholesale high-speed third-party internet access. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Motion is in order. To the motion. Member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to reiterate a point that I think is made in the last three motions here, is that we pay Northwest Tel about $10 million a year right now. We co-own a $100 million fiber line with them. The CRTC and the federal government gives them hundreds of millions of dollars in public money every single year, and yet consistently we do not advocate or hold them accountable to allow competition in the market. I understand that they are largely the only regulated internet service monopoly in Canada, and there's some fighting that has to happen at the CRTC that does that. But to date, we have built publicly funded infrastructure and then not allowed third-party competition on it. We have failed to get the last mile to home in a lot of communities, and I think the way to do that is leverage our position of giving Northwest Tel millions of dollars every single year to get some things out of them. And I just haven't been seeing that to date. So I hope that the minister takes these recommendations seriously. I know there's some ongoing projects in cooperation with Northwest Tel, but really we have to make sure that when taxpayer money is used to build internet infrastructure, that wholesale high-speed third-party access is allowed, so some competition can maybe emerge in this monopoly. Thank you.
To the motion. Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? All those abstaining? The motion is carried. Mr. Jacobson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that the committee recommends that the government of Northwest Territories address digital divide within the Northwest Territories by providing free access to basic internet packages through income assistance funding through the Northwest Territories Housing Corporation for public units. Recommendation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is another one that in almost every other jurisdiction, the federal government has created a low-income internet service which allows subsidized internet. Northwest Tel's parent company, Bell, has offered that in many jurisdictions. Northwest Tel has refused to do that here, once again, because they're this weird, very federally regulated monopoly. But I really do believe that there's a way to leverage the $10 million a year we give them to say, hey, we want to do what your parent company has agreed to do in other jurisdictions and make an internet rate for people who have lower incomes. And I also think there's a way to probably leverage some of that through public housing. Lots of public housing in other jurisdictions now has bare minimum, low bandwidth, free Wi-Fi built into the buildings. Northwest Tel, I think, could probably offer that service. It's probably even a win for them. Their parent company has started doing it in places. So once again, I think this is really about meeting with Northwest Tel and leveraging the millions and millions of dollars we give them every year. Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Yellowknife North. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with my colleague. I think this is one of the low-hanging fruit that we often hear the government talk about. As we, again, had gone through the pandemic, we've realized how much of our stuff needs to be accessible virtually. And a lot of low-income people in my constituents have told me that they are not able to download forms or get online and do the housing or the health requests and things that they need to do, and that's a lot of work that we as MLAs end up picking up to help them navigate the system. So I think this is a win-win that in the long run would actually end up saving the government money and would allow MLAs to focus on other areas of our work than trying to just be pathfinders to the system. So I really want to throw my support behind this motion as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Great Slave. To the motion. Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? All those abstaining? The motion is carried. Member for N.W.T.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that the committee recommends that the government in Northwest Territories address the digital divide building partnerships that provide free Wi-Fi services in all regional centres. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. The motion is in order. To the motion. Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? Abstention? The motion is carried. Member for N.W.T.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that the committee recommends that the government of Northwest Territories procure internet services in smaller pieces so that local internet service providers can effectively bid on these opportunities. Thank you, Madam Chair.
The motion is in order. To the motion. Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? Abstentions? The motion is carried. Member for N.W.T.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that the committee recommends that the government of Northwest Territories provide a response to the recommendations contained in this report within 120 days. Thank you, Madam Chair.
The motion is in order. To the motion. Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? Abstention? The motion is carried. Thank you, committee. Do you agree that you have concluded consideration of Report 22-19-2, Standing Committee on Economic Development and Environment Report on Telecommunications? Thank you, committee. We have concluded consideration of Committee Report 22-19-2, Standing Committee on Economic Development and Environment Report on Telecommunications. Committee, we've agreed to consider Committee Report 20-19-2. 2019-2 Standing Committee on Social Development Report on Bill 30, an act to amend the Aurora College Act. I will go to the Chair of the Standing Committee on Social Development for any opening comments. Member for Cam Lake.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, the committee's report was read into the record on November 30th, 2021, so I do not have any additional substantive comments to add at this time. Individual members may have comments on the report, and I would like to thank the committee for their work on this report. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Member for Cam Lake. I will now open the floor to general comments on the committee report 20-19-2 Standing Committee on Social Development Report on Bill 30, an act to amend the Aurora College Act. Member for Great Slave.
Sorry, Madam Chair. I just got really into my committee work this season. So I just wanted to say that I think that the way that I see this moving and the work being done on Aurora College with the inclusion of the councils and such, that I believe it's in the right faith of what we discussed as a group when we first met back 2 years ago around this time, or I guess a little bit earlier, to discuss our priorities and mandate. And so I'm excited to see that this is a piece of legislation that will now incorporate Indigenous voices and N.W.T voices in the college as it moves forth. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Member for Great Slave. Are there any further comments? Member for Frame Lake.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Yeah, I'm not a member of the committee, but I sat in on a lot of the meetings and deliberations, and I want to thank them for putting up with me. No, I think this is another example of a collaborative approach with our friends across the aisle, where there were concerns identified by a number of presenters, and compromises were reached. And the minister accepted, I think there was 7 different motions for changes to the bill to, I think, get a better balance in a number of areas in terms of Indigenous peoples, their representation in this moving forward, balance of power between the board and the minister. So I want to compliment our colleague, the Minister of Education, for that work. But I also want people to understand that this is like a small piece of a bigger picture in our move towards establishing a polytechnic university. What this bill really does is reestablish public governance at Aurora College, something that was taken away about 3-4 years ago in the last assembly by the minister, then minister, and so certainly I support this, and but it is starting to cast the die or the mold moving forward in terms of a polytechnic university, but there still has to be a lot more work done in terms of the legislation to move towards the polytechnic university, but this is, I think, some good first steps, and so I want to compliment the committee and the minister. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Member for Frame Lake. Any further questions or comments? Seeing no comments, Member for Cam Lake.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I move that this committee recommends that the Government of the Northwest Territories speak to questions on co-drafting legislation and co-management beyond resource management-based legislation and discuss this concept with the N.W.T. Council of Leaders. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. The motion is in order. To the motion? Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? Abstentions? The motion is carried. Member for Cam Lake.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I move that this committee recommends that the Department of Education, Culture and Employment and Aurora College take note of this request, that engagement timelines are respectful and sufficient for stakeholders to support meaningful consultation and ensure that the timeframes for engagement and consultation concerning the Polytechnic University are adequate. Thank you, Madam Chair.
The motion is in order. To the motion. Oh, sorry. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to make a comment that we are hearing in several of the committees that people are feeling a bit of engagement and consultation burnout and fatigue. So I just wanted to say that this, I think, is very important because while it does say that, yes, we are reaching out to all these people, if they're not feeling like they have the adequate time to respond and such, then are we really meeting the goals of engagement? So I just wanted to say that I strongly support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Great Slave. To the motion, Member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think how much consultation and engagement and how long a process takes is really the debate of the entire G&W.T on all matters, and it's not a delicate matter. The previous motion speaking to bringing things to the Council of Leaders, I asked that the government take that seriously, and clearly this could be a legacy of this government as we find that balance. On this situation of the Polytechnic, I think committee, I fully support them, making sure everyone is properly engaged. I think in many ways we get one last shot at this to do this right, and in many ways some of the faults of Aurora College have been political interference in the past and inability to be nimble. And I think there's a balance to be struck here, is that we have to make sure we have buy-in from Indigenous governments and buy-in from communities to the creation of this new Polytechnic initially, because once the board is established, I really hope that there'll be no more political interference and they will be able to make decisions quickly. But let's get it right the first time, and we can all take pride in this. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Member for Yellowknife North. To the motion. Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? Abstentions? The motion is carried. Member for Cam Lake.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I move that this committee recommends that the Government of the Northwest Territories provide a response to the recommendations contained in this report within 120 days. Thank you, Madam Chair.
The motion is in order. To the motion. Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? Abstentions? Motion is carried. Thank you, committee. Do you agree that you have concluded consideration of Committee Report 20-19-2, Standing Committee on Social Development Report on Bill 30 and Act to amend the Aurora College Act? Thank you, committee. We have concluded consideration of Committee Report 20-19-2, Standing Committee on Social Development Report on Bill 30 and Act to amend the Aurora College Act. Committee, we have agreed to consider Bill 30, an act to amend the Aurora College Act. I will ask the Minister of Health and Social Services, sorry. Don't ask you. The Minister of Education, Culture and Employment to introduce the bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm here today to present Bill 30, an act to amend the Aurora College Act. I want to thank the Standing Committee on Social Development for their interest in and review of this bill. This bill will result in an arm's-length governance system that supports an effective, efficient, and sustainable Aurora College, positioned to continuously identify and respond to the needs of Northern residents, Indigenous governments, partners, and stakeholders. It will also set the stage for further legislative change in 2024 to create the Polytechnic University. The creation of a Polytechnic University is a priority of the 19th Legislative Assembly, and the Government of the Northwest Territories mandate commits to transformation of Aurora College into a Polytechnic University in 6 years, including meeting a quality assurance review by fall 2023. In order to meet this commitment, timely amendments of the Aurora College Act are required to establish a new system of governance that meets national standards and best practices. Proposed amendments to the Aurora College Act before us are critical to the transformation process, and I appreciated the opportunity to collaborate with Standing Committee during their review of the bill. I believe we worked together in the true spirit of consensus government. I would also like to acknowledge the considerable input that has been provided by Indigenous governments, partners, stakeholders, and members of the public through the development of this bill. The establishment of a tricameral model of governance and a competency-based Board of Governors will better position the college to identify and respond to the needs of Northern residents. The establishment of an Indigenous Knowledge Holders Council as part of the tricameral model will ensure the N.W.T is a leader in incorporating Indigenous ways of knowing, being, and doing into a public institution that reflects the people it serves, including a largely Indigenous student population and a range of Indigenous research partners. To be recognized as a university in the N.W.T, Aurora College will follow a process required under the Post-Secondary Education Act, beginning with meeting the requirements of an external quality assurance review. Amendments to the governance system proposed in Bill 30 will meet the necessary quality assurance standards and best practices in post-secondary education governance needed for the external review. That concludes my opening remarks, and I would be happy to answer any questions that members might have on this bill. And Madam Chair, I have witnesses I would like to bring into the chamber. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Sergeant at Arms, please escort the witness into the chamber. Minister, please introduce your witnesses.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have Director, Legislation Division, Christina Duffy, and Director, Aurora College Transformation, Dr. Chris Joseph. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome. I will now open the floor to general comments on Bill 30. Does a committee agree that there are no further comments? No comments. We can proceed to a clause-by-clause review of the bill. Committee, we will defer the bill number and title until after consideration of the clauses. We will consider the clauses in groups. Please turn to page 1 of the bill. Clause 1 to 5. Does committee agree? Clause 6 to 10. Does committee agree? Clause 11 to 14. Does committee agree? Committee, to the bill as a whole, does committee agree that Bill 30, an act to amend the Aurora College Act, is now ready for third reading? Thank you, committee. Does the committee agree that this concludes our consideration of Bill 30, an act to amend the Aurora College Act? Thank you, Minister, and thank you to your witnesses. Sergeant at Arms, please escort the witnesses from the chamber. Member for Frame Lake.
I move that the chair rise and report progress. Thanks.
There's a motion on the floor to report progress. The motion is in order and non-debatable. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion is carried. I will now rise and report progress.
May I please have the report of Committee of the Whole, member for Twin Lakes.
Mr. Speaker, your committee has been considering table document 437-19-2, committee report 20-19-2, committee report 22-19-2, and Bill 30, and would like to report progress with 13 motions carried, and that committee report 20-19-2 and committee report 22-19-2 are concluded, and that Bill 30 is ready for third reading, and that consideration of table document 437-19-2 is concluded, and that the House concur in those estimates as amended, and that an appropriation bill to be based thereon be introduced without delay. And Mr. Speaker, I move that the report of the Committee of the Whole be concurred with. Thank you.
Member for Twin Lakes, do we have a seconder? Member for Haverford North. All those in favor? All those opposed? Any abstentions? Motion is carried. Third reading of bills. Third reading of bills. Mr. Clerk, orders of the day.
Orders of the day for Wednesday, December 8th, 2021, 1:30 p.m. Prayer, minister statements, member statements, returns to oral questions, recognition of visitors in the gallery, acknowledgements, oral questions, returns to written questions, replies to commissioner's address, petitions, reports of committees on the review of bills, reports of standing and special committees, tabling of documents, notices of motion, motions. Notices of motion for the first reading of bills, second reading of bills, consideration in committee of the whole of bills and other matters, Bill 23 and 29, committee reports 21-19-2 and committee report 22-19-2, report of committee of the whole, third reading of bills, Bill 30, orders of the day.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. This House stands adjourned until Wednesday, December 8th, 2021 at 1:30 p.m.